All right. Well, thank you for joining me today. Today we'll be talking about the basic tasks and functions that system login access managers are in charge of. So we'll be talking a little bit about what those expectations are, as well as then how to actually go about doing any of the functions that fall within that purview. And I've scheduled this for about an hour, but it shouldn't really take the full amount of time. So I do encourage you to ask questions if there's something that you need a little more clarification on, or would like me to show in more detail or anything like that. Feel free to put it in chat or unmute yourself and ask, and we can dig into anything that people need a little bit more help with. Before we get into the actual agenda, one of the first things I wanted to start with was the definition of a SLAM. Since everyone here is either the primary SLAM or a secondary SLAM for their library, I hope that most of you are aware of this acronym and kind of what it entails. But for those of you that are new, because we do have several people who have just joined us recently in this role, I just wanted to give a quick overview of it. So the SLAM stands for System Login Access Manager, and that is basically an administrator whose duty it is to monitor and maintain staff login accounts. And this, in a lot of systems, is the director. In some systems, especially our larger systems, it's more of sort of a technical person, somebody who's maybe head of IT or something like that for the library. So it really depends on the library system who is in this role. But the most important thing to note is that it is somebody who is sort of at administrative level, because you do have the ability to do a lot of things in Evergreen that can impact how your library staff accesses and interacts with the software. So, it's definitely not a role that we want to have lots and lots of people in. So we generally have just one, or in some cases two, so that we can kind of keep any account edits or anything like that contained. Basically, these are the people that have system admin privileges within Evergreen. And the main thing that they do with those privileges is to update staff accounts. And so this means everything from creating those accounts when new staff start at your library, to changing permission levels up to a certain point, removing staff access if somebody leaves the library, and then also one of the things we'll talk about is updating close dates, which is unrelated to the account management portion of it, but falls kind of under that same system admin purview. So we're going to kind of go over all of these aspects of the role today. We're going to talk about creating staff login accounts. We are going to talk about maintaining those accounts. And as part of this, we'll talk about the new password policy. We'll talk about how that is impacting your staff, and kind of what that means for how I communicate with you about accounts, and then also what your staff will need to do to ensure that their accounts stay up to date. We'll talk about the quarterly communications that you receive from me related to your staff accounts. We'll talk about the process of deactivating accounts. We won't go into great detail on the process of transferring reports, which is something that can come into play in some cases when deactivating an account. I'll mention it briefly, and we'll talk about the basics of it, but I'm not going to go into great detail on how to do that process. But if you ever do find that you have a staff member who is leaving and you need to deactivate their account, and you have recurring reports at your library that run off of that account, then just let me know and we'll walk through the process together if you're not sure how to transfer those reports the first time. And then we'll also talk about the close dates editor. So let's talk about what staff login accounts actually look like. There's basically a life cycle to them where they are created. They are created by the SLAM. So when you in your library get a new staff member, we ask that you create those accounts for them, just because you know all of the contact details and things like that. So it's a lot easier for you to create the accounts. And also because if, some of our libraries are fairly large and have a large number of staff, and there's a lot of turnover amongst those staff. And so it's better for that to be done at the library's level so that you can kind of maintain track of who has accounts and all of that kind of thing rather than going through us. So we will ask you to create those accounts. The first time you create an account, if you are not sure what to do, let me know and I'm happy to walk you through it. The 15th time you create an account, if you're not 100% sure and you have questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to always walk you through it. But I will ask that the actual creation goes through you rather than through me, just to make sure that that kind of control is staying at the library level and that account security is staying at the library level. After an account is created, it does need some management over the course of its lifetime. Usually this is the expiration of passwords or the expiration of the account itself. Passwords do change every 90 days for the most part. Staff are in charge of this themselves, should be able to update their passwords. If a staff member has forgotten their password, you as the SLAM have the ability to click a button within their account, and I will show you that when we take a look at accounts in a few minutes, that will generate a reset link that will go to them. In some cases, this reset link doesn't work. The first reason it doesn't work is because the email address associated with the account is incorrect. So we do recommend that prior to hitting that button, you double check the email address and make sure it's correct, especially if you're coming from a system that maybe has had a domain name change or something like that. That's happened quite a bit recently for a lot of our systems. But just double check that email address. If those password reset generation links are still not going through, there may be issues with your local firewalls or something like that, not allowing these emails to actually come through. So if that's the case, let us know. And we'll do our best to come up with an alternative solution. Usually involves creating a temporary password. You're welcome to do that yourself as long as it is a circulator or circulation lead account. If it's anything other than that, then it'll have to go through us to do a temporary password. And then, of course, if you do have a staff member whose permission level needs to change, if it is a cataloger, then that does go through the Cardinal team. But if you are changing them, from a circulator to a circ lead or something like that, you do have the ability to do that permission level change. At the end of a staff member's time at the library, the final step of that account is to deactivate it. And this is for security reasons. We do ask that you don't leave staff accounts live. You don't need to delete them. In fact, sometimes it's a good idea to kind of keep them available in the background if we ever need to kind of go back and, trace kind of what happened on a different transaction or something like that. Having those accounts stay in the system is good, but we want to make sure that they're not active so nobody could log into them. And so we'll go through that process. There are several steps to it to make sure that that account is as secure as possible after the staff member leaves. So basically, as SLAM, you're in charge of creating accounts. You're in charge of maintaining the currency of those accounts through both making sure they don't expire and any sort of password resets or anything like that. And then you're in charge of deactivating them. Through any point in this cycle, I'm always happy to help or answer questions, especially for those of you who don't have a lot of turnover, who don't have to do this often. Feel free to reach out anytime. It's also in the knowledge books as well. Let's start at the beginning and let's take a look at the process for creating accounts. Now, those of you who have done this before, this will be very familiar. Those of you who just sort of work in circulation and so have practice with creating patron accounts, this will also be the same process as that with a few minor differences. A few things to keep in mind when creating a staff account. There are different types of staff accounts available. There are generic accounts that a lot of our libraries use for their circulation staff. So you may have, Circ Desk 1 or something like that, that all of your circulators log into. If that's the case, then as the SLAM, you are in charge of creating that account. And often you'll also be kind of the main point person for that account. Your email address will often be the one associated with it. If it is a larger system and you have maybe a circulation supervisor or a branch manager who is in charge of the staff that are logging in on that account, you can have them as the point person. You can put their email address in. But just be aware that whoever is in charge of that account does need to stay on top of the password and make sure that it gets changed prior to its expiration date. Because with the new password policies that we put in place during our last upgrade, if a password expires, the first time somebody attempts to log in after that expiration, they will get a notification that the password needs to be set prior to being able to complete the login. And so that means that, just your first circulator who comes in the morning is the one who's going to be resetting that password. Ideally, that's not how that should happen. Ideally, it should be done prior to that point so that the person who's resetting it and then communicating that new password out is kind of a centralized point person for that account. So whether that's you or whether that is a manager for that department is kind of up to your library and how you want to manage that. But it's important just to make sure that that is sort of stayed on top of. In addition to generic accounts, there's the regular staff logins that we're all familiar with. And these are the ways that people log in to Evergreen. For the most part, this is going to be that username that you have with your first initial and last name. And then on top of that, there are also a different type of staff account, which is your staff circulation account. And this has caused a lot of confusion in the past and will probably continue causing a lot of confusion into the future. Basically, because your login accounts, the ones that people use to actually access the staff client, we ask that you not circulate materials on those accounts. If you need to be able to circulate materials to staff, whether this is for staff's personal use, just as their library account, or for actual work use, a cataloger who needs to place items on hold in order to reprocess them, or youth services who wants to be able to check out materials for a story time. All of that we would want that to happen in a circulation account, one that does not have access to the back end and the staff client. And so I'll show you how you would set these up. These are basically the same as the patron account that you would create. It just has a patron type of staff. And that does allow you to have sort of special circulation policies for staff members, but it also ensures that, we're not putting that circulation of materials onto staff login accounts. So it creates that separation. There are some standards for personal information when you're creating staff login accounts. The first one to be aware of is that the middle name should not match the person's middle name. It doesn't have to necessarily be the same across all of NC Cardinal, but we do ask that you come up with a consistent middle name to use for your staff at your library system. And so a lot of libraries just use staff login or the name of their system or something like that. It doesn't matter what you use. We just, it's a good idea to make it consistent. If kind of in looking through your staff accounts, you realize that it's not been done consistently, that's something that you're certainly welcome to kind of go back and retroactively change. If you'd like a report of all the middle names, let me know. I'm happy to pull that data for you. It's not a huge deal, but just kind of for the sake of making the data really easy to kind of look through and visually see that an account is a staff login account. That's helpful. Another standard to be aware of is that birth dates should not be the staff member's actual date of birth, but instead it should be a generic one of January 1st, 1900. I have seen some libraries have chosen a different year. It's not really a problem, but one of the reasons we use 1900 is because that's unlikely to be anyone's real birth year. So when sorting, if you're running reports and things like that, it's easy to very easily pick out those people that are definitely staff. So if you've chosen like 1960 or something like that, then it doesn't quite have that same impact. Again, not a huge deal, but just sort of a consistency thing that we do prefer you to use. And then, of course, another standard is the usernames. These are generally going to be your first initial and last name. If a staff member first initial and last name would create a username that's already in use in the system, you can either add a middle initial, you can add a one at the end, you can add the first two letters of the first name. Just, once again, kind of think about it and how you can be consistent with that. It's honestly fairly rare. I haven't seen a ton of that over the last few years, which is surprisingly to me. But if you do run into that, there are a couple of different options that you can take to ensure a unique username. One thing that we will talk about today are permission levels. So as the SLAM, you have the ability to work with any account with either circulator or circ lead permissions. I believe you also have the ability to add branch admin permissions, but once the branch admin has been added, you will no longer have the ability to edit that account. So any future edits to that account would have to go through the Cardinal team. But circulator and circ lead, you have the full ability to edit, which means that you can do things like update expiration dates, update names if a name changes, that phone numbers, email addresses, anything like that for those two account types. Cataloging permissions are a little bit different because, of course, staff do have to pass the cataloging assessments to get those permissions. So if you have new staff that come on board who are going to be catalogers, what we ask you to do is to create a circulator account for them. And you can go ahead and do this for their first day so that they can go ahead and start getting familiar with Evergreen. They won't be able to catalog with that account, but they'll be able to log in with it. Once they pass their assessment, I will go into that existing account and I'll add the cataloging permissions to it. And at that point, you as the SLAM would not be able to do any editing to it. So if a name changes or an email address changes, that would have to, you'd have to let us know and we'd do those updates for you. But cataloging changes, but cataloging permissions are added by me after a successful assessment pass. But it is very helpful and will make the whole process go more smoothly and quickly if there's already an existing circulator account before the staff person takes their assessment. Most of the people on this call have probably gotten an email from me at some point saying, hey, this person's passed their assessment. Can you go ahead and create an account for them? Which is totally fine. I don't mind doing it. It's very common, but it will be faster for your staff person to actually begin cataloging if they have that account set up already, because then as soon as I see they pass the assessment, they'll get those permissions added. So that's the basics of permissions. And then the final thing, and this is something that is very common, especially for new SLAMs, to miss when setting up accounts. And I'll be honest, I miss it when setting up accounts a fair number of times too. And that's setting your working locations. This is what will allow someone to actually log in. Everything else can be all set up, but if they don't have a working location selected, they won't be able to log in. And so I'll show you how to do that. It's not difficult. It's just in a different tab, so it slips my mind, and it slips a lot of people's minds. All right, any questions about the general kind of, we'll go on into these all in a little bit more detail, but any questions about sort of this general account setup stuff? Well, let's talk a little bit about all the different account types. I did hit on this just a moment ago, but we'll talk about it in more detail. So the generic accounts, as I said, these are generally circulator accounts. They are allowed for basically circulators and circ leads, but anything beyond that would need to be an individual login. So basically no branch admins and no catalogers can be on a generic account. You can have a few different types of this. So you can have circulator or circ lead, but also like if you have volunteers who come in who need to have very basic Evergreen access, maybe just for checking in books or things like that, you can set up a volunteer account and that's going to give them very limited access. They won't be able to do much with like patron data or anything like that, but they'll be able to do some very basic functionality. So that's something that you can do for volunteers or pages. There's not a specific page permission type, but you could set them up as a volunteer if you wanted to basically kind of limit their access to full Evergreen. And then a lot of people are not aware of this, but there is the ability to create a reports account. And this is something that you can create so that you can have sort of shared reports across your library. And that way, if you have staff turnover, you don't have to worry about, transferring reports between accounts or anything like that. You can have multiple people who all log into this reports account and create and run reports and things like that. Um, Basically a reports account, all accounts allow you to run reports, but a reports account allows you to do sort of not much else besides running reports. And it's useful for those sort of like widely shared reports that your whole library staff is going to need access to, because then you don't have to worry about, who actually owns the template for this report that we're running, and who's got the recurrence set up and all this kind of stuff. It's all centrally located. So that's something that you can consider doing if your library is not already doing it, if that would make reports easier for you. Staff login accounts, of course, are those individual accounts you use to access the staff site of Evergreen. And as I said before, these should not be used to circulate or hold items. There is nothing that will stop that from happening. So if a staff member checks out an item onto their staff account, Evergreen will let them, but it is against our policy for that. Every once in a while, they may get a little red alert message on their account saying this account should not be used for circulating items. If you do need to circulate items for a staff member, then that's when you would need a staff circulation account. And these can be individuals. They can, some libraries have special staff circulation accounts specifically because they don't want to charge their staff members overdue fees or something like that. So by adding that staff permission group, they can create special circulation policies that don't charge overdue fees. Or you may just want to use this for work-related circulations, which is also fine. That's up to you how you would like to use these, if you want to use them at all. But just be aware that the actual login accounts can't circulate items. But if you wanted to have special circulation policies just for staff, whether that's individuals or for departmental use, you can set that up. Right. Any questions about the different account types? I know that these two do cause a lot of confusion because they're both called staff accounts. But if you've ever looked at, and we'll see this in just a moment when we go into an account, if you've ever looked at the profile dropdown, you will see that, one of the options in that profile dropdown is staff. That is the circulation account. So if you've ever created an account for somebody and you've put that as their permission group, they would not actually be able to log into Evergreen with that permission group. That would have to be changed to a circulator or above. So let's actually take a quick look at that. So if I am in registering a patron, which is how you would start for creating a staff account, and I come down here to the profile permission group dropdown, I have this section up at the top for Evergreen staff. These are your login accounts. So it goes everywhere from volunteer up to system admin, and then of course the catalogers. Something to be aware of is that the reason you see these indentations here is that circulation lead inherits everything from circulator. So any permission a circulator has, a circulation lead also has, plus a little extra. Same thing with branch admin. Anything a circulation lead has, the branch admin also has, plus a little extra. And then system admin is the same as that. Item cataloger, though, you'll see is at the same indentation level as circulation lead, because the only thing that they have inherited are circulator permissions. So every permission a circulator has, an item cataloger also has, but they don't have anything that just a circ lead has or branch admin has. Anything further down this tree is not inherently part of a cataloger account, which means if you have somebody who is going to be working as, both a branch manager and a cataloger for that branch, and they need to be able to do things like overriding certain things without holds or something like that, do certain things with money that a branch admin would do, then they would need to have both of these permission groups added in order to get both sets of permissions. And so it is possible to do that by adding a secondary group using this button over here to the side. So I could create an account for a circulation lead who is also an item cataloger. You don't really need to worry about that because, of course, you're going to be adding circulator and circulation lead permissions. And once cataloging comes into it, then I'm the one adding that profile group. But be aware that that's kind of what I'm doing at that point. So if you have somebody who's going to be a circ lead and a cataloger, go ahead and create the circulation lead account for them. And once they pass their assessment, then I will add that in as their secondary permission group and change their primary permission group to item cataloger. Just be aware that it is possible to have both sets of permissions. Now in this dropdown, you'll also see scrolling down. So we've been in the Evergreen staff section. Scrolling down, there's another section for patron. And under patron is staff. This is the circulating account for a staff person, which means that if you set somebody up as a staff account using this permission group, they will not have any login access. So when you are setting somebody up for something they're going to log in with, make sure that you're setting it as a circulator or a circulation lead. If you want to create a secondary account for them to use to circulate items, then that's when you would use this staff option down here. All right. If you do have further questions about that, please let me know. But we'll go ahead and create an account now. So as I said before, a couple things to be aware of with that personal information is that the middle name would be something consistently standard within your library. The date of birth is going to be January 1st, 1900. Do make sure that you include an email address because that's where, notifications about the password going to expire will be going to that. If you do a password reset, then the email address needs to be filled in order for that reset to go out. So you do need to include an email address. You don't need to include a phone number, but I recommend that you do, just because, if there's ever a situation where there's an issue with the account and we need to contact the person, that's probably where we would go to pull that phone number. If a person, a circulator or something like that who doesn't have a set phone number, you can just put in the library's phone number. That's completely fine. You can leave the phone number out if you'd like to, but I do recommend that you put it in there, that you at least put something in there. And then the address needs to be the library's address. I don't think I've ever seen anyone put in a staff member's home address in this field, but just you never know what could happen in the future. So I want to reiterate that it's the library's address. So like I said before, you create a staff account the same way you do a patron account by coming to circulation and choosing register patron. And so that's going to bring you into the register patron screen. And from here, you fill it in just as you would a patron with those changes that make it into a staff account. So the first change is, of course, that they don't get a barcode, they get a username. Now, if anyone here has ever made an account before, you know that if you fill in the barcode, that's automatically going to fill in the username. They're generally the same, at least when you're creating the account. So you can just type the username into the barcode field. Both of these fields will have to be filled out, so you may as well just do it once by putting it in barcode. So actually, let's make this first initial. So you would generally do first initial and then last name, and then that's automatically going to fill in for your username. Password, we will ask that the staff member creates their own password once you've finished this whole process and they log in for the first time, but obviously you can create a generic password for them to get started. Now there are, because of our new password policies, there are requirements for passwords. When you are first creating an account, you will need to at least include a capital, a lowercase, and a number. And you'll need it to be at least 8 characters long. Now, if somebody has an admin account, when they change their password, they'll have to make sure that there's also a special character as well. I think I'm correct about that. If I'm not, Llewellyn, please correct me. You don't need to set that up when you first create the account, because if you're creating it at a circulator level or something like that, but if somebody does become an admin, then at that point, whatever their account or whatever the password was will grandfather in, but the next time they have to update it, they'll have to add that special character, basically. Does that make sense? So when you create the account, it can just follow the regular circulator rules if you're setting it up as a circulator account. But if that permission level changes in the future, the password may need to be stronger, but that strength requirement won't kick in until somebody tries to change the password for the first time. All right. We'll go ahead and fill in our first and last name, but the middle name would be whatever standard is used in your library. So, that can be anything from library staff to staff login to, Walnut Cove Library, whatever it is that your library uses. Date of birth, of course, we're going to put this in as January 1st, 1900. You don't need to fill in any of these white fields here. Just at the next yellow field, we're going to make sure that we get an email address in here because that's where any notifications related to this account will go. And we'll go ahead and put in a phone number. And it looks like Llewellyn did clarify passwords get encrypted as soon as they're created. So policy changes don't apply to them, but the policy will apply the next time the password is changed. So just be aware of that. All right. Now down here for the home library, most often you'd want to put that for wherever the staff member will work most often. So if you have staff who kind of float around from branch to branch, this doesn't have to change as they float, but wherever their kind of home base is, wherever they're going to be most often would be where you'd set this. So, whether that is your main branch for somebody who floats, or whether it's wherever they work twice a week instead of everywhere else they work once a week. Whatever your library decides is the best thing to do for this. It doesn't need to change as they move around. If somebody does do a permanent move from one branch to another branch, you might want to change it at that point. And then, of course, the permission group. We've talked about this quite a bit. I'm going to go ahead and set this as a circulator. Now, down here, you'll see that the privilege expiration date is automatically set for 3 years from now. That's going to be the case every time you create a staff account. Just be aware that in 3 years, this account's going to expire. We'll talk about this later on in the presentation, but I will send out an email every 3 months or every 3 months that has a list of every staff account that is set to expire in the coming 3 months. At that point, you or I will go in and update those. If it is a circulator or a circulation lead, you can update them. If it is anybody else, just let me know this person still works here or this person doesn't, and I'll do that expiration update. And I'll show you how to update expiration dates in just a moment. Let's finish getting this account ready though. Now, of course, the account is automatically going to be set to active, so I'm just going to leave that there. We don't need any of these user settings because these mostly have to do with holds. Obviously, you won't be placing holds on this account. The mailing address, of course, will be your library's mailing address. And then you shouldn't need any stat cats, but if you do have stat cats that you apply to staff accounts, I guess you can go ahead and apply them here. And once you're done, you just save it. Oh, I missed something. What did I miss? Oh, it reset my password for me. All right. All right, so the account is created, but it's not ready yet because the next thing that we have to do is add working locations. In order to do that, the first thing I have to do is go into the patron's account. So I'm just going to do a patron search for the patron account I just created, and I'm going to click on their card to go into their account. If I did need to make any edits, I could do that here in the Edit tab. I'm not going to right now. I did mention earlier that you have the ability to generate a password or to send a password reset link for somebody. This is where you would do that. So if somebody forgot their password, you could use this to send an email to them that allows them to reset their password. And that's how we'd prefer for passwords to be reset whenever possible, just because it's more secure than creating a temporary password and sharing it with them. Obviously, there are situations where the email simply isn't going to work. And in that case, we'll do the temporary reset, but this is always the first thing to try. Under Other is the user permission editor. So this is where we need to go to finalize the staff account because I still need to set my working locations. Without the working location, this account will not log in. In fact, I can show you what happens if I attempt to log in. So I've put in the password that's set. I've got the username. I attempt to log in and I get this indicator saying no working locations set for staff account, which means that this is all I can do. I can't do anything from this point because if I attempted to move into, one of these menu options, it's just going to pop me back here to log in again. And if I log in again, I'm going to get to that same error message. So until I set my working locations, the staff simply does not have access. So what I need to do here is come into the working locations list, and I need to choose any branch where this where the staff member is likely to work. So in this case, my home library is Alexander, Maine, so I'm going to choose that. I may also want to choose other ones from within my system. A lot of places will just choose every single branch in their system, regardless of where that staff member will most likely work, just in case. After I've chosen my working location, I scroll all the way to the bottom of this list and I click Save. And so now, if I attempt to log into this account, I think there we go. Usernames are case sensitive. I'm pumped into this page where I can set my workstation and then I'd be able to have full access. So those working locations are really important. Without them, that final login option won't be available. Any questions about working locations or just the general process of setting up an account? All right, well, let's talk about what you need to do once an account has been created in order to maintain it as an active account. Key things to remember for maintaining accounts is that you do have the ability to verify a password. So if a staff member is trying to log in and their password's not working, then it is possible to verify it coming up here to this other menu and choosing test password. So you could, if it's the password you just set up for them and it's failing, then you can type this in. If it's their personal password, then you can sort of have them sit down at the computer and have them test it. But you type the password in and verify, and it says basically whether or not it's correct. So that time it was correct. So I got the little green success notification. If it fails, I get the little pink failure notification. So this is a way to make sure that the issue, to basically determine if the issue logging in is an actual incorrect password, or maybe there is, something else going on. So this can be your the first thing that you do when a staff member says they can't log in, is to just verify the password here. If they truly have forgotten their password, or the password was maybe typed incorrectly initially, and so now when they're trying to log in with what they think is set, it's not working, then that's when you would do a passwords reset, which of course is this send password reset link option here from their account. The next thing to be aware of is expiration dates. And this has been an issue quite a lot recently. A lot of accounts have been expiring. If an account expires, then when the staff person goes to try to log in, they won't even know why they can't log in. They'll try to log in and basically nothing will happen. I believe you should be able to send a password reset for any permission level, but I might be wrong about that. I can test it very quickly. Well, actually, I can't. I'll test that and I'll get back to you on that one, Mary, but I'm pretty sure you can do that for any level. You wouldn't be able to edit somebody's account, but you can at least get into it, which would allow you to hit this button. If you can't, if it turns out that you can't, the workaround for that is actually in the OPAC. So if I go into the OPAC and I try to log in, there's this forgot your password link. So if it turns out that you cannot generate that password reset link for somebody who is a cataloger or something like that, you can have them go to the OPAC to this forgot your password, and then just fill in their username and their email address, and that's going to generate that exact same reset email. So that's an easy workaround if you need to do that. So expiration dates have been a bit of an issue lately. I think we just kind of hit a patch of a lot of accounts that were created at the same time, probably from a migration or something like that. But it happened at several different libraries. So it's no one individual library failure point. It's sort of it's a ubiquitous problem. But what happens when somebody's account has expired and they try to log in is that they won't be able to log in and they won't even get an error message explaining why. They just won't have access. And so as a result, it's kind of confusing, and we tend to get a lot of like very worried tickets saying evergreen's down. In order to avoid that, as SLAM, make sure that you're staying on top of expiration. For circulators and circulation leads, as somebody is coming up to their expiration date, just come down here and click this update expire date button, and that will automatically update it. Here, I'm actually going to change it to something different so that you can see what happens. If I click update expire date, it'll change it to exactly 3 years from the date I click that button. You can also do a manual change using the little calendar widget to, whatever date you want. If you wanted to kind of have a standard expiration date, I suppose you could, but we do prefer that everything gets that 3-year period. So I wouldn't get too wild with that. If it is a cataloger account or a branch admin account, then that expiration date update needs to come through us at Cardinal. But we don't necessarily know when somebody's going to expire. So if you have accounts that are going to expire, just let us know that that's happening, and we'll go ahead and do those updates for you. As I said, every 3 months, I do send out a list of anyone who's going to be expiring. And so what I want you to do with that list is basically update the ones you can, and with the ones you can't, so catalogers and branch admins, let me know, these people still work here, please extend their account, or these people no longer work here, please deactivate their account. So basically you don't have the ability to extend every expiration date, but it's if you could sort of be the point person for managing those extensions, that helps me out a lot. And it makes sure that we don't have staff who are coming in and trying to log in and not having access because their account has expired. So just something to sort of keep an eye on. And, you don't have to go into everybody's account once a month to make sure nobody's going to expire, because you will get those notifications from me. But if staff will get sort of a little thing saying that their account will expire soon. So if a staff person sees that and lets you know, feel free to just go ahead and extend it, or contact me and I'll extend it if it's that higher permission level. Any questions about that process? Let's talk a little bit about password maintenance. Basically, when it comes to passwords, SLAMs have the ability to update the password to a generic account. So if you have just sort of every circulator logs in on the same account, you can update those passwords. Just make sure you share them with the staff that need them. You have the ability to send those password reset links, and you have the ability to verify passwords, as we saw. SLAMs do not maintain a list of all staff login account passwords. So if it's not up to you to remember everyone's password for them. It's just up to you to help them reset it when they forget it. And then we also prefer that you avoid manually resetting passwords for individual accounts. If you can, use that password reset link button rather than coming into an account and coming up here and just manually saying, setting a new password. And then sharing that, just because that's less secure, especially if you like email the new password to somebody or something like that. So whenever possible, choose to use this button. Obviously, as I've said, we know that sometimes your library's, email firewalls won't let that through. And if that's the case, you don't have a lot of other choice. But barring that situation, try to always use the link here. That's really all that you need to worry about with password maintenance. It's not your job to remember everybody's passwords for them. They can remember their own passwords, but you are sort of the point person for your library when somebody has forgotten it. We're always happy to help with that process as well. And if somebody comes to us rather than to you, especially in a larger system, they may not know who their SLAM is. That's fine. We'll happily reset it for them or send that reset link for them. But that's kind of where your role is in terms of passwords, is helping people when they forget it, not remembering the passwords for them. So don't worry if you're worried about that. You don't need to worry about that. So we've talked a little bit about cataloger permissions. Just be aware there are 2 levels of those permissions, both item and bib. People do need to pass assessments to get those permission levels. If they are a bibliographic cataloger, they need to pass both assessments, not just the bib assessment. All account maintenance on cataloging accounts will happen at the NC Cardinal level. You as SLAM can absolutely be the point person on that. So if you know that a cataloger needs to have updates made, you can be the one to request those. The cataloger doesn't have to be the one to submit the ticket. But just be aware that you don't have edit access once somebody becomes a cataloger, which I think most people on this call are aware of. But if those of you who are new, once somebody becomes a cataloger, then most of their account edits and changes will come through NC Cardinal. Well, all of them will. I have talked a few times about the quarterly communications that you will receive from NC Cardinal. Basically, every 3 months, you will hear from me. You will get a list of staff members who are set to expire in the coming 3 months. I usually do a little bit of a buffer zone, so it's usually 3 months plus about 2 weeks. So anybody who's kind of set to expire during that time. I will also send you a list of staff members with out-of-date passwords. You don't have to be responsible for the fact that those people have not updated their password. It's more for your information. Prior to the most recent upgrade, I kind of asked you to bug them for me. At this point, they won't need that, because when they try to log in after their password expires, they will not be able to. So it's more to let you know this person might come to you with questions about this. So be aware of that. You certainly can bug them about it if you'd like to. But basically, you don't need to worry about updating those passwords or anything like that. It's just a matter of letting you know that may be happening. The more important thing is that list of staff members who are set to expire. When you receive that email, Basically, the first thing that you'll need to do is update the expiration dates for any circulators or circulation leads who are still employed, deactivate any who are not. Then send me a list of any catalogers or admins that need to be updated, and request deactivation of any catalogers or admins who are no longer employed at the library. If you have a situation where, like, this person is still working here, so they still need access to their account, but they're planning to retire in 2 months, go ahead and let me know. I'll put a little notification on my calendar, and the day after their retirement, I'll go in and deactivate their account. So, you can definitely keep me posted on things like that. And if you have, like, your bibliographic catalogers planning to retire, even outside of these communications, feel free to reach out to me and just say, this is their retirement date. Can you deactivate their account afterwards? And I'm happy to do that. And you don't need to send reminders to staff to update passwords because, like I said, with the new policy, they will be locked out, and that'll be a pretty stiff reminder, but feel free to if you want to. That's kind of your call at this point. The most important thing is that we make sure that those expiration dates are taken care of. So if you get that email from me and you kind of put it to the side and then you forget about it because your life is very busy, that's totally understandable. I will probably reach out once more to anybody that I don't hear back from. But so just kind of know that it's generally going to be coming. The last one came October 31st. So the next one would be January 31st or February 1st. So just kind of have that on your radar, know that's going to be coming, so that you can kind of set aside time to deal with that if you get a list. With the password policy, my guess is that the quantity of these is going to go down prior to the lockout aspect of the password policy. Basically, every SLAM got an email from me every 3 months. With this change, I'm expecting that number to go down. I will probably still reach out to you and just say all your accounts are in good standing right now if you don't have any actions to take. But keep an eye out for those emails. Final thing I wanted to talk about related to accounts is deactivation. Deactivation is a multi-step process. It is something that you can do for circulators and circulation leads, and that I will have to do for admins and catalogers. Deactivation is not deletion. These accounts still exist. They are still accessible. When you search, you can check a box to include inactive accounts. As I said, SLAMs will deactivate circulators and leads, and I will do everyone else. Well, anyone in Cardinal will do everyone else. When deactivating, I recommend that you change the permission level down to volunteer. It's basically impossible to get into the account after it's been deactivated. But just in case something happens where it's accidentally reactivated or something, if somebody were to access that account, they can't do any damage if it's a volunteer account. So go ahead and set it down to the volunteer level, just in case. And then we won't really get into this today, but if that person is running reports that you still need prior to deactivation, you will need to transfer those reports. Deactivation can be found through a patron search. So deactivated accounts can be found through a patron search by clicking include inactive, and they can always be reactivated. So if you have somebody who quits and then comes back a few months later, you can just reactivate their same account if it hasn't been deleted yet. Deletion is final. We can find some information about the account through a query, but a lot of the stuff related to that account will go away. Most of the personally identifying information will go away. It cannot be reactivated. In some cases, we've had occasionally a situation where something was deleted by accident. We can ask Mobius to reinstate something deleted, I believe, but obviously we would prefer not to do that. I think it loses a lot of details when it's deleted. So there's a lot of setup that would have to go back into that account. So one reason that we say to deactivate rather than delete is if there's any reason that you need to get back into that account at any point in the future, you still can if it's been deactivated, whereas deleted is much more permanent. To deactivate, there are 4 steps. The first is to change the password. The second is to basically expire the account by setting its expiration date to today, to the day that you're deactivating, changing the permission group to volunteer, and then finally unchecking the active button. So if we're in our staff account here and we come down here, I've already changed the password once. Let's change it again. And you can set this to just a random string of letters and numbers. It doesn't really matter. Down here, I'm going to change my permission level to volunteer. I'm going to change my privilege expiration date to today. And the way I'm going to do that is clicking on this calendar widget and choosing today. And then I'm going to uncheck the active box. Then I come up here and save. And so this is now deactivated. One way I can tell that is it's in red, its expiry date is in red down here. If I come in and search for this patron, nothing comes up. If I check this include inactive box, then it comes up. You see in the active column, it says no. So it's still accessible, but it is not active. Nobody could log in with this. So we've done that. With reports, as I said, we're not going to really do this today, but before staff leaves, if they are running reports, like especially recurring reports that your library needs, before they leave, ask them to put all those reports into a templates folder that has sharing turned on so that you can just go clone them. And clone them before deactivating the account. And then if they can give you, if you do this before they leave, they can help you set up those reports following the same parameters that they've been using. If you forget about this and you don't realize that those reports are running off their account until they've already left and their account's deactivated, you'll need to reactivate their account, and then you'll need to log into that account, and then just do the same thing. Basically, put them into a shared folder, clone them into the account that's going to own them now, and then set them up to run again. Reports that are set to recur will continue recurring for a little while. I think maybe once or twice after deactivation, but eventually they will fail. So when somebody leaves, if they own recurring reports, this is something that you definitely need to make sure that you get taken care of. And it is easier to do that prior to them leaving rather than after they've left. So I just recommend having that as part of your sort of exit process. We're not going to do this today. Instead, we're just going to talk about the closed dates editor. This is basically an option for you to set closed dates that fall outside your library's standard open and close hours. So this would generally be holidays and things like that. You can set these for emergency closing. So if you have a day where you're going to be closed because there's a snowstorm, you can set an emergency closing. If you have a time where you need to close the library unexpectedly for just a portion of the day, just an hour or two, you can do that as well. The close dates editor will push all due dates that would fall on the close date to the next open date. So this already happens with those that you set up ahead of time for holidays and things like that. So, nothing should have been due at your library on Thanksgiving, for example, if you had that set up. If you have an emergency closing, then you can actually process all of the due dates that are set for that emergency close date so that it pushes that due date out to the next day that you are open. And then it also, when fines accrue, it will not count that closure date within the calculation of how much is due. So, if you're open Monday through Saturday every week, then patrons only accrue overdue fines Monday through Saturday. So basically 6 days out of the week. They don't accrue overdue fines on Sundays if you're not regularly opened on Sundays. If you have an emergency closing, then that same thing will happen. Let's say you close due to weather on Wednesday, then a patron who had a book that was due on Monday will have an overdue fine for Tuesday, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, etc., but not Wednesday when you were closed, because if they happened to return it that day, it wouldn't have been checked in until the next day anyway. So just be aware that those emergency closings do impact both fine accruals as well as due dates, and then also hold expiration. So if something's sitting on the hold shelf and it's going to expire on a date that you're closed, that expiration will be pushed out until the next day that you're open. There are 3 types of close dates. There's a full day. This is just a single all-day closure. It's sort of your standard, we just won't be open on this day. Multiple days you would use for a closing that lasts 2 days or more. So if you're going to be closed for an extended holiday weekend or something like that, you can set that up. You don't have to set up a different closure for each day. You can set up a single one that covers the entire period. And then detailed is used for partial day closure. So if you're only going to be closed for a few hours, you can go into the detailed option and set that up. An emergency closure can be applied to any of those. And then that will retroactively change the existing due dates and hold expirations. It can be applied at any of these links. I don't think it does much if it's detailed. If it's just closed for an hour on a specific day, I'm not sure it'll have a huge impact, but for the others, it will, it'll extend those due dates. A couple things to be aware of with close dates, and I realize it's 3 o'clock, so we'll hurry through this. If you set an emergency closing and then delete that closing, the due dates will not revert. So if you set an emergency closing for tomorrow and then you delete that, all of those things that were supposed to be due tomorrow that were changed to being due on the 5th, those will still be due on the 5th. They won't go back to being due on the 4th. So just be aware of that if you do one by accident. If you are setting a closing for all branches, you have 2 options. You can either set each branch individually, or you can set them at the system level and choose a button that says apply to all of my libraries. You may only do the apply to all of my libraries if you are at the system level, which means that if you're doing it from one branch within that system and you choose apply to all of my libraries, that will not roll out to all of the other branches. And I don't think you get an error message if you do that by accident. Also, if you are setting a closing for all branches and you check that box, that's going to roll it out. If you don't check that box, then no due dates will change. So just be aware that if you do it at the system level and you don't check the apply to all of my libraries box, then all of the items due at your branches will still be due during that emergency closing. So just make sure you check both boxes. When setting an emergency closure, you'll need to choose process immediately. If you do not choose process immediately, you will not be able to go back and process later. This is basically the thing that makes all those due dates change. You can't set up the emergency closing, save it, and then go back in and process everything. You either have to process it at the time that you set it up, or you won't be able to process it at all. So just be aware that you do need to do that. There may be situations where you need to set an emergency closing, but you don't actually want to change any due dates. You have the ability to do that by simply not processing anything. But if you don't process anything and you wanted to, you'll have to delete the one that you set up and create a new one. Let's look very, very briefly at this. The option for it is under Administration, Local Administration. And it's here under the Closed Dates editor. So it's automatically going to be showing me the close dates for the branch where I am logged in. I can take this up to the system level. And then from here, I can set a new closing by clicking Add Closing. At the system level, if I want to roll this out to all my branches, I click this button here to apply to all of my libraries. I choose my closing type, whether it's a day, period of multiple days, or just a few hours. I set the date. If I've got it to detailed, then I also set when it starts and ends. And then I name it. And so this can be, the name of the holiday you're closing for, or it can be the name of the issue that's causing the emergency closing. This is something that you probably do want to do yearly, setting up all of the planned closures for the coming year. And then if you're doing that, you're not going to do any emergency closing here. If this is something that's sort of happening, in this case, I'm setting it for today. So it's telling me right now, this is a possible emergency closing. If I see this indicator, it's just a reminder that if it is an emergency closing, I need to say that it is, and then I need to determine if I'm processing the due date changes. And if I do, I click this, and this may take a moment because it's going to have to process anything that's due today, which may not actually be anything because I'm in next. So it processes that, and then it will tell me how many things were actually impacted. Oh my goodness. I'm going through every branch. That's what's taking so long. And so this is basically just going through and it's pulling anything that's due on the date of this emergency closing, and it's changing that due date for me, as well as any hold expirations, and then also booking reservations. That's not commonly used, but it is checking those as well. And that is the process for emergency closing. I'm going to let that continue in the background. But just a couple of things to remember about SLAM, about sort of your duties as a SLAM, is that all catalogers and admins must have personal staff login accounts. And if you could create those prior to somebody taking their cataloging assessments, that will reduce the amount of time they have to wait to be able to start cataloging. Staff login accounts cannot circulate items. Don't forget to add your working locations when setting up a new staff account. Staff must reset their own passwords. I have via OPAC here, but it's actually possible to do that within the staff client now as well. And don't forget to deactivate accounts when staff leave. If you have questions as you're working through any of this, please feel free to reach out. Submit a ticket or email me. I'm happy to walk you through any of these processes, especially if you don't do it very often. It's easy to forget how. But just the most important thing to remember is to add that staff, the correct permission level, and make sure that the account is ready to go when your staff person needs it. See if those are done yet. They're not. But any questions for those of you who are able to stay a moment? I don't think we have any guidelines for creating test patron accounts. Forrest asked if there are any guidelines for test patron accounts. Obviously, you don't want to have too many of them because, that's going to throw off your numbers. I'd recommend you do them mostly in Next or Dev, probably Dev. Just because then if you want to try, circulating things and things like that, you won't do any real transactions. But if the reason you're setting up that test account is that you need something that's live, you're welcome to do that. A lot of our libraries do have a test account, so feel free to do that. But I would recommend not having too many of them just because it will throw off your data for PLS and things like that. Great question. Anything else? Oh, and here's my emergency closing finally did process. You'll notice when I was at the system level, it said that nothing happened because nothing is actually checked out or due at the system. So you have to go down to the branch level, and from the branch level, I can see that at the PAC branch, 960 due dates were changed, and then 15 expiring holds were changed. Of course, this is in Next, so I haven't actually closed PAC for the rest of the day. All right, any other questions? Let's see. Nancy asked, does only the SLAM have access to make changes in the closed dates editor? I believe so. Well, anyone with system admin permissions has this. So some systems do have more than one person with system admin. I believe, in fact, you do too. Oh, and Forrest says branch admin can as well. And I think that I think he's actually, that sounds right. So I think that's correct. So you can have other people do it. Just make sure that you're not sort of crossing wires too much. I think, I've seen some where like there are two different close dates for Christmas or something like that. So make sure that if you have multiple people doing close dates, that you're talking to each other. I don't think that'll have a huge difference as long as they're both the same. But And I do think that there are probably some multi-branch systems where the branch manager probably does that at each individual branch. Um, so. Any other questions? I know we have a lot of new slams right now. We've had a few different people take over this year, so um, if you do have questions after this, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to walk you through the process of any of these. Um, but hopefully this answered a few of your questions. And we do have a SLAM group on Basecamp, so if you're not part of that and you'd like to be, let me know and I can add you to it. It's not a particularly active group, but it could be. All right, well, I will get this recording out, so feel free to share it widely. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I appreciate your time. I appreciate all you do to keep our accounts in good shape and active.